They branded her wrist with silver and called her a traitor. Her husband, the Alpha, watched in silence as the council burned the mark into her skin. One word from him could have saved her. He never spoke it. 3 winters later, she lives alone in the Thornvale forest. Then 40 soldiers ride to her door, led by the Alpha King himself. Her husband is dead. His confession names her innocent, and the man who destroyed her now hunts the sacred moonglass stone to seize the throne. The king kneels at her hearth. He sees the brand. He does not look away. Ice bridges crack, wolves circle. A traitor lights a signal in the dark. The elder grove opens only for her. Black fur, silver fur. A throne hangs on one joined hand. You taught me silence. Now watch what it built. The village of Raven's Hollow said her name like a closed door. 3 years. That was how long it had been since anyone in that cluster of low stone houses had spoken Seraphina Vale in the present tense. They spoke it in past. The way you speak the name of a sickness that finally passed. With relief. With the quiet satisfaction of people who had been spared something, even if they could not say what. Have you ever watched the person you trusted most stay quiet? At the one moment, a single word from them could have saved everything? If you have, you already know how this story begins. The villagers had agreed on the shape of it, the blood moon. 3 winters back. The forest had taken her. The cold had taken her bones. The wolves had taken what the cold left behind. Children learned it the way they learned to count. Old men nodded over it, the way they nodded over weather.
The story did not require anyone to remember the woman it buried.
That suited Raven's Hollow just fine, except she was not dead, on the eastern edge of the Thornvale forest. Where pines grew so old and so tall they swallowed daylight whole, there was a stone cottage that most travelers never found. Not because it was hidden, because the forest itself discouraged company. Paths bent away at the last moment. Wind blew the wrong direction for tracking. Animals moved quiet here. The land kept its secrets close. The woman at its heart was 26. She looked older in the eyes. She was lean in the way people who have survived on their own terms are lean. Not elegant, not soft, built. Her dark hair was tied back with a strip of deer leather she had cut and dried herself the first winter, when her hands still shook, and she did not yet know if she would live through to spring. Her hands did not shake anymore. They were calloused, stained with elderberry juice and the dried residue of a dozen different roots and barks she used for medicines. Her name was Seraphina Vale. She had been other names before. None of them mattered now. That particular morning, the morning everything would change, she was crouched beside the frozen bank of a narrow Favam stream, refilling her clay water jug when she felt it. A tremor. So faint a normal person would have missed it entirely. She was not a normal person. She pressed her bare palm flat against the icy earth and felt it again. A rhythmic vibration, the kind that came from many large bodies. Moving in formation, moving with purpose. She rose slowly, told herself they were far away, told herself they would pass, the way every patrol of every pack had passed in 3 years. They never came this deep. The forest did not let them. But even as she thought it, the small wolf she kept locked inside the dark cellar of her chest, the creature she had spent 3 years teaching to be silent, lifted its head, whined, just once. Quiet. The way a dog whines when someone it once loved walks past the gate. She ignored it. She had become very good at ignoring things that could not be helped. The stream water ran clear and cold over the lip of her jug. She watched it fill. She watched the way the morning light caught the edges of the ice along the bank. Small things, the kind of small things she had taught herself to notice in the years when no one was noticing her. A single crow called once, somewhere above the pines. The crow was new. She did not know that crow. She filed that. She walked home along a path that did not exist on any map. Her boots made almost no sound on the frozen moss. She had learned in the first year to walk the way the deer walked. Heel last, weight forward, breathing through the nose. The forest had taught her that, not by instruction, by consequence. Loud feet had cost her trapped rabbits in the early days. Silent feet had brought her dinner. She paused once on the path, listened. The tremor was not repeating. The army, whoever they were, had stopped moving. That was almost worse. A moving army was an army going somewhere else. A stopped army was an army that had arrived. Her cottage sat under 4 ancient oaks whose roots had grown around the foundation stones like fingers around a held cup. The walls were gray. The roof was moss. The chimney smoked thin in the cold morning. Inside, braided herbs hung from the rafters. Rows of clay jars sat on shelves she had built herself. A wolf hide covered the narrow sleeping pallet. An iron pot waited on the hearth. 2 crude chairs sat at a small table. On the windowsill sat a wolf carved from oak, about the size of a fist. The ears were uneven. The proportions were slightly wrong. The work of someone learning, alone, to make a thing she had never been taught. She set the water jug on the table. She had work to do. Work was the answer. Work was always the answer. But what nobody passing this cottage would ever know, what no scout had ever reported back to a council, was this. The pack the council had once accused her of betraying had only survived its hardest year because she was the one quietly holding it up. 3 years ago, before her name became a ghost story, she had been Luna of the Iron Claw Pack, the sacred moon-blessed mate of Alpha Kalen Vale. She had carried the title for exactly 1 year. In that year, she learned 3 things. The first was that the title came with a great deal of ceremony and very little real power. The second was that her husband was not the steady, honorable man she had believed him to be when she had accepted the bond at 19. The third was the lesson that had cost her everything. The most dangerous place in a wolf pack was not at the bottom of the hierarchy. It was beside the alpha. Because when an alpha fell, everyone nearest to him fell too. And if the fall was not accident, if it was design, then the person standing closest became the lightning rod, the sacrifice offered to calm the anger of those who wanted blood. Kalen had not fallen. He had been pushed. His beta, a cold-eyed man named Theron Blackmore, spent 2 careful years building the case against the alpha. Real cruelties he had documented. False ones he had manufactured. And when the Alpha Council of the 5 Great Packs convened their tribunal, Theron did the things she had not seen coming until it was far too late. He offered her, not as a villain. As evidence, he stood in front of those 5 alphas and told them that Luna Serafina had been part of every cruelty her husband had ever committed, that she had known of illegal border raids, that she had signed off on pack members imprisoned without cause, that she had encouraged the dispatch of young wolves into a border dispute they had no business fighting. He had witnesses. He had documents bearing her seal, forged, every single one, forged flawlessly by a man who had spent 2 years learning the exact angle of her hand. The worst part was not that they believed him. The worst part was Kalen, sitting in the accused seat across that long stone hall, looking at her with something that was not quite guilt and not quite cruelty, something cowardly, and he had said nothing, not one word. He had let the silence speak for him. He had let her drown in it, the healer's stores, the border families, the widows whose husbands Kalen had sent to die for nothing, the pups whose parents could not afford winter grain. She had run all of it from the shadows, because that was where Luna work happened in those days. And because Kalen had never asked, Kalen wore the crown. She did the work of the crown. And when the time came to defend her, the man who knew the truth better than anyone else alive sat in his chair and watched her burn. The Alpha Council stripped her of her title, her rank, her right to claim any pack territory, her right to be acknowledged as a bonded mate. They branded her, a silver ring, burned into the skin around the base of her right wrist, visible to every wolf she would ever meet. It told them what she was, what she had been declared. Unworthy, she was given 3 hours to leave Dusk Hollow territory. She did not cry, not then. She walked out of those stone gates with her spine straight and her eyes dry, and she did not look back. The crying came later. Alone, in the dark of the Thornville forest, curled against the roots of the largest oak she could find. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she wiped her face, stood up, began the slow, grinding work of surviving. 3 years later, she was still here. The brand at her wrist was the first thing her eye found every morning. A small, steady reminder that the world had decided what she was, and the world did not care that it had decided wrong. She did not look at it now. She did not need to. She knew it was there. She was hanging a brace of rabbits outside the cottage door when she felt the second tremor. Closer now. Much closer. Her wolf surged so suddenly she had to grab the doorframe to keep her feet. The wolf was not afraid. The wolf was something worse. Recognition. The wolf knew something it had no right to know. She went inside, bolted the door. A useless gesture against wolves of any real size, but it made her feel better. She crossed to the workbench, picked up the pestle, tried to focus on the rhythm of the grind. She had become very good at making her outside still while her inside ran. The tremor stopped. The silence after was worse. Then, cutting through the quiet of her forest like a blade through silk, came a voice. Low, steady, full of a natural command that the grinding stone slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. Seraphina Vale, not a question, a declaration. The voice of a man who had never had to ask for anything because the world arranged itself before him. She pressed her back to the stone wall beside the window. Her heart hammered, not with fear. With something else. The wolf inside her was at the bars of its cellar. Wide awake, she looked through the gap in the wooden shutters. Her blood went cold. 40 men, standing in full battle formation at the edge of her clearing, black and silver armor. The generals and wardens of the most feared army in the known territories. Big men. Quiet men. They were the background noise, because of who they stood behind. He was tall the way mountains are tall. Not just measurement, presence. Black hair cut close at the sides, longer on top. A jaw that looked as if it had set against difficulty so many times it had simply locked there. He wore no helmet. His armor was black steel with silver detail. The crest of a crown and a wolf pressed into the chest plate. She knew that crest. Every wolf between the eastern mountains and the western sea knew that crest, Eric Ravencrest. The Alpha King, 32 years old. The man who had united the fractured pack territories under one crown through 10 years of war and diplomacy, and the kind of unwavering will that bordered on something terrifying. He was said to be incapable of mercy when he had decided a thing needed to be done. He was said to have shifted into a wolf, so large during the Battle of Raven Pass that the opposing army had simply run, weapons still in their hands. He was standing at her door. She looked at the silver brand on her wrist. She looked back at him, of course, she thought, with the dry, exhausted humor of someone who has been not knocked down enough times that absurdity no longer surprises her. Of course, it would be him. She straightened her spine. She unbolted the door. She stepped outside. She had decided, 3 years ago in the dark of this forest, that she would never again show fear to a man with a title. She kept that decision now. Dirt on her hands, rabbit blood on her apron, her chin level, her eyes steady. The Alpha King looked at her for a long moment. His amber eyes moved from her face, down to the silver ring at her wrist, back to her face. Something flickered in those eyes. Not what she expected. Not contempt. Not the satisfaction of a powerful man finding a small one. Something she could not read. Something that made the wolf inside her go very, very quiet. His voice, up close, was lower than it had carried. Good. You are alive. Her own voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. You sound surprised. Did you come all the way out here to check? The general at his left shoulder, a broad man with a silver scar through one eyebrow, made a small, sharp sound that might have been a swallowed laugh. Eric Ravencrest did not laugh, but something in his eyes shifted. Briefly, the way a still lake shifts when something underneath it moves. No, I came because I need you. And because the truth about what happened to you 3 years ago has finally surfaced. And because the man who put you here has just declared war on my throne. She looked at him. She looked at the 40 armed men behind him. She looked back at the king. You had better come inside. Though I will warn you, I only have 2 chairs. He had to duck to get through her doorway. He did it without complaint. Without the self-consciousness lesser men brought to physical awkwardness. With the simple matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who had spent a lifetime navigating a world not quite built for his size. He stood in the cottage, which was not small by any measure of a normal person, but which became suddenly intimate with him in it. His amber eyes missed nothing. She watched him take in the herbs, the jars, the wolf hide on the pallet, the iron pot, the 2 crude chairs he had been warned about, the stack of hand-copied texts in the corner. His gaze stopped on the small wolf on the windowsill. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, "You made that." It was not a question. She did not answer it. She crossed to the hearth and poured pine needle tea into the 2 cups. Because pine needle tea was what she had, and she would not apologize for it. She set the cups on the small table, sat, folded her hands in her lap. He sat. His knees nearly touched the edge of the table. He wrapped both hands around the cup with a kind of deliberate care, as though he had decided to treat the small vessel with respect. He looked at the cup, then at her. 3 years ago, the Alpha Council tried and exiled you on the testimony of Theron Blackmore. He claimed you were complicit in the crimes of your husband, Kalen Vale. Against his own pack, I know what happened to me. Then you deserve to know what has happened since. His voice was level, careful. The voice of a man who chose his words the way a good archer chose arrows. Kalen Vale is dead. He died 14 months ago in a border dispute with a rogue pack. She did not move. Before he died, he made a confession. Written, witnessed, sealed. He confirmed the documents bearing your seal were forged by Theron Blackmore. He confirmed you knew nothing of the border raids. He confirmed your exile was a deliberate political removal orchestrated by his beta, who intended from the start to take the alpha position himself. The silence in the cottage was absolute. She had imagined this conversation in 1,000 variations. Long winter nights, cold, sleepless dawns. She had imagined how she would feel. Relief, fury, the collapse of every wall she had spent 3 years building. What she felt sitting across from the Alpha King was none of those things. What she felt was a deep, aching tiredness. The kind that lives not in the body, but in the part of a person that has been holding itself together through pure effort and is simply exhausted from the effort. Her voice came out flat. Not cold, just flat. And what has Theron Blackmore done with the alpha seat he worked so hard to steal? Eric's jaw tightened. A small movement, barely visible. She caught it anyway. He has spent the last year building alliances with 4 rogue packs along my northern border. 3 months ago, he made a formal challenge for the king's seat. He claims my throne is illegitimate because I did not follow old succession laws when I unified the territories. He has the open support of 2 of the 5 original Alpha Council members. Politicians always find each other. Yes, a pause. He has something else. What? The location of the Moonglass Stone. The name hit her like a thrown stone hits still water. The Moonglass Stone was not a legend, though most people treated it as one. It was a piece of the original moon altar, the sacred site where, according to the oldest pack histories, the first Alpha King had been chosen by the moon herself, granted authority over all wolves, confirming his right to rule. For centuries the stone had been lost. But the old records were clear on one point. Whoever presented themselves at the stone and was accepted by it could make an unbreakable claim to the Alpha King's seat. Not a challenge, a sacred confirmation. Beyond appeal, beyond army, beyond council, he is going to use it to legitimize his claim. Yes, in 23 days, at the next full moon. The window after that is another 100 years. He held her gaze. I need to reach the stone first. She knew where this was going. Something in her chest twisted at the knowing, and the stone is in the Thornville forest. The stone is in the Thornville forest. A forest that has actively repelled every scouting party I have sent into it for 6 months. A forest that, according to every tracker and navigator in my service, is impossible to read from the outside. The amber eyes held her, steady. But you have lived in it for 3 years. You want me to guide you. I want you to do more than guide me. He set the cup down. Serafina, the tribunal that exiled you. I have the authority to formally reverse it. Kaylin's written confession, combined with my royal declaration, is enough. Your title can be restored. Your brand can be removed. Your name can be cleared before every pack in the territories. She looked at the silver ring on her wrist. In exchange, she said, guide me to the stone. Help me reach it before Blackmore. Help me understand whatever you have learned about this forest. In 3 years of living in it. And if we fail. If he reaches the stone first, something moved in his expression. Something she suspected very few people ever saw. Brief. Honest. A man acknowledging the weight of the thing instead of dressing it up. If Blackmore is confirmed at the Moonglass Stone, then the Alpha King seat transfers to him under sacred law. My army becomes his army. The territories I spent 10 years uniting under one piece fall back into the hands of a man who exiled an innocent woman and built his power on lies. A pause. And the 23 packs currently under my protection go back to the kind of existence they had before unification. Which is to say, fear. She already knew she was going to say yes, but she looked at him for a long moment anyway, because she was no longer the girl who had walked into a bonding ceremony at 19 without asking every question she needed to ask. She was the woman who had been left to die, who had not died, who had grown something harder and quieter in the not dying. When do we leave? Dawn. Something in his face shifted, something small, something controlled. Something that, if she had to name it, she would have called relief. He stood. She stood. 3 of his officers came through the door at his quiet nod. The first was the general with the scarred eyebrow, broad, blunt-spoken, Caspian Hale. First general, the second was a woman about her own age. Shorter, quieter, gray eyes that held everything and gave nothing. Lyra Ashfield. Warden of the North, the third was the youngest. Lean. Watchful, 23 at most, Cassian Thorne. Scout commander, she fed them what she had. Root stew. She spread her hand-copied forest maps across the table. The Thornville is not like other forests. It does not just disorient you, it responds. The deeper you go, the more actively it resists people with hostile intent in their chests. She looked at Caspian Hale. Your scouting parties. Were any of them injured going in? 2 lost their sense of direction entirely. Walked in circles for 2 days before we pulled them out. 1 came back with a broken ankle. From a fall his own men said made no sense. Flat ground. Broad daylight, the forest tests intent. It sounds like old superstition. It is not. You cannot walk in there carrying war and expect it to cooperate. The king nodded once. He had been quiet through all of it, watching her work, not interfering. Outside, the 40 soldiers were already making camp. Inside, Caspian Hale stood near the door, arms crossed, watching the woman at the table with a face he had spent a career learning to keep unreadable. He was 40 years old. He had served under the king's father before serving the king. He had carried out orders he had not asked questions about, in his younger years, the way young soldiers do. Looking at the woman with the brand on her wrist, leading 3 of his junior officers through a map drawn by hand on bark paper, he felt the first small turn of a thing he would not be able to name until much later. He did not say anything. He stepped outside to check the perimeter. Dawn came up gray through the pines. The army was already moving when she stepped outside her door. Caspian Hale had organized them through the night with the quiet efficiency of a man who treated logistics the way other men treated breathing. 37 soldiers under his command would maintain the perimeter. The 6 who would go in stood waiting at the edge of her clearing, the king at the center, the 2 officers, the healer, the tracker. Already provisioned, already silent, Arik looked at her as she came out. She was wearing the practical clothes she always wore for long days in the forest. A heavy wool tunic, leather leggings, the same belt with the same small knives and pouches she had carried for 3 years. She had not dressed up for him. She would not dress up for him. He looked briefly, as though he understood that and approved of it. He inclined his head. Whenever you are ready, she had one last thing to do. She crossed back inside the cottage. She took the small carved wolf from the windowsill. She held it for a moment in her palm, uneven ears, slightly off proportions. The first thing she had ever made with her own hands without anyone teaching her how. She set it down again, carefully, in the exact center of the sill. She did not know yet whether she would come back to this cottage. She knew only that if she did not want the wolf to be the last thing of hers in the world that anyone had to find, moved out of place. She walked outside. She did not turn for a final glance at the cottage. The forest had taught her 3 winters ago that the things you leave behind do not need your witness to keep being themselves. 2 new figures stood at the king's shoulder she had not met yet. The king introduced them quietly. The healer was a man of 50, Alaric Wren. Quiet eyes, the kind of quiet that came from decades at bedsides. He inclined his head to her, said nothing. She inclined her head back. She liked him already. The tracker was a young woman, sharp face, quick eyes. Movements that came from training, not instinct. Izel Vex. Northern Range. How long have you tracked? 8 years. Started at 17, Serafina nodded. Filed it. 25 years old. Trained hard. Eyes that did not quite meet hers when she spoke. She turned to the trees. Stay close to my heel. Do not draw weapons unless I tell you. Do not speak loudly until we are past the first old grove. The trees here know my voice. They do not know yours. Cassian nodded. Izel nodded. Alaric nodded once, quietly. Lyra raised her eyes from the ground for half a second and let them rest on Serafina's face with something that looked like respect. The king did not nod. He simply stepped into place behind her. She turned. She faced the trees. She took the first step into the Thornvale. The forest received her the way the forest always received her. The light shifted under the canopy. The air went quiet in the particular way a held breath is quiet. The wind died at her shoulder. The path opened. Behind her, she felt the others move in. Felt the forest assess them. Felt it weighing what they carried in their chests. She did not speak to it out loud. She never had. She thought, in the same quiet way she had been thinking for 3 years. They are with me. Please. The forest did not answer, but the path stayed open. Behind her, she heard Cassian breathe out slowly. He whispered, more to himself than to anyone. It is warmer in here, yes. That is a good sign. She led them deeper. The pines closed around the small column of 6. Branches that had refused every scouting party for 6 months bent aside for her boots. Roots that had broken ankles arranged themselves into steps. Behind her, 6 pairs of eyes watched the forest do these things. And 6 minds began the long, slow work of understanding that the woman they were following was not just a guide. She was the only door this forest would open. By the 2nd hour, the group had settled into a rhythm that surprised her. She had expected soldiers. Discipline of the rigid, forward-facing kind that did not account for a forest with its own opinions. What she found instead was something more flexible. Lyra Ashfield moved with the lightness of a woman who had spent years in northern wilderness on her own. Cassian Thorne adjusted his weight on the soft ground without being told. Izel Vex read tracks Serafina nearly missed. The healer, Alaric Wren, walked at the rear in his own silence, present but not insistent, and the king. The king did not lead. The king watched. She caught him in the 2nd hour, crouching beside a small cluster of pale silver mushrooms. He did not touch them. He simply looked. She stopped. Do you know what those are? He glanced up. The amber eyes were patient. No. Tell me, she crouched beside him. She was aware, pointedly, of the distance between his shoulder and hers, of the heat that came off him even through the cold air. Her wolf shifted in its cellar again. Not frantic this time, curious, which was somehow worse. She kept her voice professional. Moonbell mushrooms. They only grow where old sacred ground was. Centuries ago. This cluster means we are walking over what used to be a den site, long before the borders were redrawn. It also means we are on the right path. The stone will be on old sacred ground. The Moonbell's market. He looked at the mushrooms. Then at her. How long did it take you to learn all of this? 3 years. Did you have books? I had the ones I had memorized before exile. I had observation. I had time. Time is a very effective teacher. He stood up. For a moment they were close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, and the way the older scar on his jaw caught the light at the same angle as his expressions when he was thinking. That scar was not a battle scar. That scar was a childhood thing. She could tell. He did not move back right away. She did. She turned to the trail. She walked. The forest deepened around them. The pines grew taller. The light went the color of old silver coins. The smell of pitch and cold, damp earth thickened. Cassian Thorne kept up a low conversation with Azel Vex about northern tracking methods. Two professionals comparing notes, comfortable in the way professionals get when they recognize each other's craft. Izel responded easily. Quickly, her eyes scanning the ground. Her answers efficient. What none of them knew, what would not surface for another full day, was that Izel had been answering questions like these for 4 months with an entirely different audience in mind. Every observation she shared, every read of a track or a broken twig, she was rehearsing how to report it back to a man in a different camp. A man who paid in promises she could not afford to refuse. Her hands did not shake. They had not shaken in weeks. That was the worst part. The shaking was the part you could control. The not shaking was the part that meant you had already crossed. She kept walking. By mid-morning they had reached a small stream Serafina knew well. She called the group to a stop. Watered the bottles. Let them rest 5 minutes. Not more. The king sat on a flat stone at the bank, drank slowly, looked at the water moving past. She crouched at the upstream end, refilled her own jug. He spoke without turning. I read the tribunal records before I came to find you. She did not look up. And all of them. Including Kaylin's confession. She kept her hands moving. Then you know more about my husband than I ever did. I doubt that. Try me. A small silence. He wrote about the moment in the council hall. The moment you looked at him and he said nothing. He wrote about it with a great deal of shame and very little actual apology. Which tells you most of what you need to know about Kaylin Vale. That much I worked out 3 years ago, alone, in the cold. Under an oak, he nodded once. He did not flinch from the dry edge in her voice. He simply received it. The way a wall receives weather. He wrote something else. She did look up then. He wrote that during the year you wore the title Luna, the healer's resources, the border families, the orphan pups, the widows, whose husbands he had spent for nothing, were all in your hands. He wrote that the pack survived its hardest year because of you. That you were the alpha of the Iron Claw pack. A pause. He wrote, I just wore the crown she had earned. She did not breathe for a moment. 3 years of silence in the forest. 3 years of not being known. 3 years of small mornings and small evenings, and the slow, deliberate building of a self that did not need anyone in the council hall to see it. And the one man who could have spoken those words at the trial had finally said them. On his way out of the world, where they could no longer save her, only confirm her, her hands had gone still on the clay jug. She forced them to move again. She capped the jug. She did not look at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you should hear it. Because it was true and it was taken from you, and the least I can do is make sure you know that someone, Even the man who failed to defend you saw it. She breathed out. She stood up. We should keep moving. Yes, they kept moving. If the path felt warmer in the hours that followed, she attributed it to canopy density. She did not let herself attribute it to anything else. They made camp that night in a hollow ringed by oaks, whose roots formed a kind of low natural shelter. She showed Alaric wren which pine resin to burn for a clean fire and which to avoid. He listened with the quiet attentiveness of an old healer who had learned long ago that the woman in front of him knew more than he did about this particular patch of earth. They ate from her stores, dried venison, cold tubers. Tea she steeped from bark. It was Izel who asked, across the fire, with the directness of a tracker who did not do things sideways. The brand. Does it hurt? Cassian Thorne made a small pained sound and started to interrupt. Seraphina held up her hand to stop him. She held up the other to the firelight. The silver ring caught the flame and went briefly bright, not anymore. It burned for 6 months. Now it just exists, Lyra Ashfield, who had been quiet most of the day, said carefully. The reversal ceremony. The moon-blessed one. I have read about it. I have never seen it. I have. The king's voice from across the fire. He was looking into the flames. My grandmother. She was exiled as a young woman. Political removal. The same pattern. A different century. She lived 30 years with the brand on her wrist. The fire crackled. Cassian. You never had it removed. She died 2 years before I had the authority to reverse it. I was 17 when I learned what had really been done to her. I decided that day that exile would never again be used as a political weapon under my rule. Seraphina kept her face still. She had heard the words. She had felt the weight under them. She set her cup down. She let the quiet settle for a moment before she answered. And yet it still happened. To me, 3 years ago. Under your rule, he did look at her then. He did not flinch, yes. By a council I had not yet fully brought under the king's authority. A gap I have since closed. That is not an excuse. That is context. It does not change what was done to you. She nodded once, slowly. It was, she thought, the most honest thing a powerful person had said to her in years. No deflection, no defense, just, this is the shape of the failure, and I am not going to pretend it was smaller than it was. She found that more disarming than anything else he could have offered. And she did not want to be disarmed. She lay down on her pallet that night and turned her face away from the fire. Her wolf settled in a way that felt, for the first time, almost ordinary. As if it had remembered how to be calm without being asked. She did not examine that either. On the far side of the hollow, the king lay on his cloak with his arms behind his head and his eyes open at the canopy. He was not looking at any single tree. He was looking at the shape of his own thinking. He had not come for the stone alone. He had known that since the morning he read Kaelin Vale's confession. He had known it more clearly when he had stood at her door and watched her step outside with rabbit blood on her apron and no fear in her face. He had known it in the cottage when she had set a clay cup in front of him, as if she were not feeding the king of all the territories. Only a man. His grandmother had been dead 12 years. He had spent most of the time since learning to govern fairly. He had spent some of it learning not to be late. He had been late for her. He could not be late for this one. He closed his eyes. The fire burned down to coals. The forest watched. A short distance away, near the edge of the firelight, Caspian Hale's name would not come up tonight. He was hours away at the army's perimeter. But the same kind of quiet was settling into him there, alone with his fire and his 37 men, that had been settling into him since the morning he had watched the king ride east to find a woman with a brand on her wrist. He had served the king's father in his younger years. He had served the king himself for the last decade. He had carried out orders without asking questions, in his early career, the way young soldiers do. He had not nodded along with anything as bad as what had been done to Seraphina Vale. He was, at least, sure of that. But he had nodded along with smaller things. He had stayed quiet at meetings where staying quiet had been the easier choice. He poked the coals of his fire with the tip of his blade. He thought about the woman with the brand. He thought about how she had looked at the king without lowering her eyes. He thought about the words he had heard his own father say once, when Caspian was 11. A man's loyalty is measured by what he does on the day he finally has to ask whether he has been loyal to the right thing. His father had died believing the right thing was the crown. Caspian was 40 years old. He was beginning very slowly to wonder if the answer was different. He banked his fire. He slept badly. The ravine appeared on the morning of the second day, without warning. One moment they were walking through a corridor of pines. The next, the ground simply ended at a vertical drop of 60 feet. Below, the ravine floor was lost in blue shadow. The bridge arched across it. A natural sweep of ice, glistening pale in the morning. It looked, as she had warned, like something that had no right to exist. Cassian Thorne crouched at the edge and looked down. How far is the other side? 40 feet of bridge, one at a time. Slow, she stepped to the edge, the king's voice. Lo, I go last. You should not be the heaviest one I put on it untested. I am the heaviest one. That settles which end I take. She did not argue with that. She set her boot on the bridge. She had a technique, developed over years. Eyes forward at the far bank. Breathing even. Not thinking about the drop. Not thinking about anything. Just the cold under her boots. The give and take of trust. The bridge flexed gently as she walked. I am still myself. She thought toward it. The same one. Please. The bridge held. She reached the far side. Turned. Called the next person. Lyra crossed steady. Quiet. Reached her in 20 long careful seconds. Cassian followed. Less steady. Got across. Izel Vex stepped onto the bridge. Her face was unreadable. She walked with the careful neutrality of a tracker who had crossed worse in her career. Halfway across, her foot slipped. Not far. A small slide. She caught herself. Continued. When she reached the other side, her color had gone strange. Pale. Sweating at the hairline despite the cold, Serafina watched her, filed it. The forest had pulled at her. Just slightly. The forest had not approved of something inside Izel Vex. Izel did not meet her eyes. Alaric crossed slowly, the way old men cross things, with the patience of someone who has watched fast men fall, then the king. He was the largest of them by a clear margin. The bridge was not built for his weight. He stepped on. He moved without hesitation, without arrogance. He gave the bridge the same respect she had given it. He was halfway across when the ice cracked, not a slow groan. A sharp shot that echoed off both walls of the ravine. The slab under his left foot dropped 2 inches. He tilted. Her body moved before her mind did. She grabbed the root system at the lip of the ravine, where she always anchored herself. Extended her other hand across the last few feet. Take it. He looked at her hand for half a second. He took it. His grip was iron. Careful iron. Deliberate iron. The grip of a man who had the strength to crush and was consciously refusing to. She pulled. He moved. He took the last step off the bridge and onto solid earth. The bridge settled to silence behind him. They were standing too close. His hand was still in hers. He looked at it. He did not let go right away. She did not let go right away. That fact lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then it became a thing she could not let go on lasting. She moved her hand. He moved his. The moment closed over itself like water. He looked at her. 48 crossings. What? That was your 48th. The first one you did not make alone. She turned toward the trail before he could see what her face did. At that. The stone is half a day from here. We should move. They moved. The forest in this stretch was older still. Trees so wide 4 people could not link arms around them. Bark gone the color of dark silver with age. The moon bells underfoot were larger here. The size of saucers, steadily glowing even in daylight. The group felt it. Conversation died. Even the king's face changed. The careful blankness softened. Not into ease, into attention. By mid-afternoon, she called another short halt in a small clearing where a fallen elder oak made a long natural bench. Izel Vex slipped away from the group. Not far. Just to the edge of the clearing. She said she needed to relieve herself. Cassian, the courteous scout, nodded without thinking about it. Lyra Ashfield, who had been watching everything since the bridge, did think about it. Lyra waited a count of 10. Then she stood up. Then she walked quietly in the direction Izel had taken. What Lyra found, half a minute later, behind a screen of small pines, was Izel Vex on one knee, striking a small fire flint against a damp bundle of gray moss. A particular damp bundle. The kind that, when burned at this hour of the day, threw a thin column of grayish smoke that an experienced eye, watching from a high enough point of the forest, could read as a signal. Izel, I was not lighting the bundle to warm her hands. She was lighting it to be seen. Lyra Ashfield did not draw her blade. She did not shout. She simply spoke quietly. Put the flint down. Izel froze. She did not turn. Put the flint down. Izel set the flint on the moss. Stand up. Hands where I can see them. We are going back to the others. You will say nothing on the walk. Lyra, walk. Izel walked. Lyra walked behind her. When they returned, the group looked up. Lyra met the king's eyes. She did not need to speak. He saw it in her face. He stood, slowly, with the slow, controlled movement of a man who had learned in his 20s. That abrupt movement made bad situations worse. Izel, the young tracker, raised her face. The neutrality was gone. Something underneath it was crumpling. Sit down. There, by the oak, Izel sat. The king looked at Lyra. Tell me. Damp gray moss. Signal smoke. She was lighting it to be read from a height. From the south, he crouched in front of Izel. Not threatening. Level with her eyes, his voice was very quiet. How long? Her mouth worked. 4 months. Who? You know who. Say it. A pause. She closed her eyes. She said it. Theron Blackmore. Why? The crumpling finished. She put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. My brother? He is in the northern rogue pack. The Black Stag. Theron took him in a year ago. Said if I stayed in your service and reported what I heard, my brother would live. Said if I refused, he would not. He sent me a piece of my brother's hair in a sealed packet. To my own door, her voice was very small. He is 15. The clearing was silent. Seraphina stood at the edge of the moment. She did not move forward. She did not move back. She looked at Izel Vex, who was 25 years old, who had given them tracking advice all morning, who had crossed the ice bridge at her best, who was kneeling now on old sacred ground with both hands over her face and her brother's life in her mouth. She felt no anger at Izel. She felt only a deep, familiar tiredness. The kind a woman gets when she has lived long enough to know what the world does to young people who have no good choices. The king was still crouched in front of Izel. Look at me. She lowered her hands. What was Blackmore supposed to receive from your signal? Our position. Whether we crossed the bridge. Which route we were on. He said he would meet us at the stone whichever way we came. And you sent that signal? No. You were about to. Yes. The king closed his eyes. He stayed there, crouched, for a count of 5. When he opened his eyes, he did not look at Izel. He looked at Lyra. Send a bird tonight from Caspian's perimeter. Tell him to dispatch a small extraction team north. Tonight, quiet, to the Black Stag camp. Get the boy out. Take him to the inner stronghold under the warden's protection. He is 15. He has done nothing. He will live. Lyra nodded once. Sharp, already moving the order in her head. The king turned back to Izel. You will not signal him. You will not report anything to anyone. You will walk with us until we reach the stone. After the stone, you will return to the inner stronghold under guard. You will see your brother. You will give a full account to the council. The council will decide what you face. I will not lie for you. I will not pretend the 4 months did not happen, he paused. But I will not throw a 15-year-old to a wolf for his sister's coerced choice. And I will not throw the sister to the wolf either. not without asking what was inside her chest when she made it. Azel's mouth opened. Nothing came out at first. She managed. Why? Because I have spent 10 years punishing people. I would like, in the time I have left, to try giving someone the chance to choose again. I think my grandmother would have wanted me to learn that. Azel wept then. Silent, both palms pressed flat to the ground in front of her. The forest held. Serafina was looking at the king's face. She was looking at it the way you look at a piece of evidence you had not expected to find. The bird reached Caspian Hale's perimeter just before dawn. He was awake when it came. He had been awake most of the night. He read Lyra's small folded note by the light of his fire and felt, for the first time in his career, his hand shake before the fire had a chance to warm it. 5 lines on a scrap of bark paper. Azel Vexa Blackmore. Asset 4 months. Coerced through her younger brother held in Black Stag Camp. King has ordered extraction tonight. Dispatch best team. Boy 15, bring him to inner stronghold. Quiet, quick now. He read it 3 times. He folded it, he stood up. He looked into the trees at the eastern edge of his camp. The Thornvale ran black against the gray of the pre-dawn sky. Somewhere inside it was the king he had served for the last decade. Somewhere inside it was a woman with a brand on her wrist who had set a clay cup in front of that king and treated him like a man instead of a throne. Somewhere inside it was a young tracker whose brother had been weighed and bargained for by a man named Theron Blackmore. He had not known the brother was 15. He had not known the tracker had a brother at all. He thought about all the things he had not known across 40 years of service. The things he had not asked about. The things he had nodded along with, because the nodding had been the easier choice, and because in his early career, the question had not been part of the work. He had been 22 when he had first put on the king's colors. He had been told then that good soldiers carried out orders, that questions were for older men, that the older men, when they got to the questions, would have the wisdom to know which ones were worth asking. He was an older man now. He was beginning to understand that no one had been waiting at the other end of that timeline to hand him the wisdom. The questions had simply been left there for him to find on his own. Some of them he had found early. Some he was finding only now, at 40 years old, standing at a fire with a folded note in his hand. He went to the eastern wing of the camp. He woke 5 of his best wolves. He chose them not for ferocity, but for quiet. They were the kind of men who could move through hostile territory without leaving a story behind. He briefed them in 5 minutes. Black Stag Camp. Northern Range. Boy of 15. Name on the inside of this note. You take him alive. You bring him to the inner stronghold. You speak to no one along the way. You give your own names to no one. If you are seen, you say you are courier riders for the western trade route and you keep moving. The boy says nothing on the road. The senior of the 5 looked at the note. And if Blackmore's people resist, you leave them breathing if you can. You leave them not breathing if you cannot. The priority is the boy, not the body count. Understood. The 5 rode out before the sun cleared the ridge. Caspian stood at the edge of camp and watched them go. He did not go back to his fire right away. He stood in the cold and looked at the place where the trees had closed behind his men. He thought about a young tracker on her knees, in a clearing he had never seen, with her hands over her face, and her brother in a packet she had not been able to refuse. He thought, quietly, to no one. I have carried out orders to break people who did less than what you have done, child. And I never asked who they were. He thought, just as quietly. I was wrong to never ask. The wind moved through the pines. He turned back to his fire. He sat down. He did not pick up his blade. He just sat. 40 years old, with hands he had thought were steady, watching the coals brighten as the day came up. A man's loyalty is measured by what he does on the day he finally has to ask whether he has been loyal to the right thing. His father had said that to him at 11 years old. His father had died believing the right thing was the crown. Caspian was not sure his father had been right. He was sure, this morning, that he was going to spend the rest of his career making sure he asked the question his father had not. Inside the forest, the king's fire burned low. The others were settling. Izel was already asleep, exhausted, curled near Lyra. Cassian had taken first watch. Alaric was at the edge of the firelight, eyes closed, doing whatever a healer of his age did when his hands had been still all day. And his mind had not. Seraphina and Eric were alone in the practical sense. She looked at him across the coals. Why did you not punish her? He had answered that already, in front of the others. He answered it again differently now. Because I have been punishing the wrong people my whole career. Most kings do. We sign warrants for the people in front of us, because the people behind them, the ones who actually did the harm, are too far away to sign. That sounds like an excuse. It is not. It is a confession. She held his eyes for a moment. You have an answer for everything tonight. No. I have one answer. I just keep finding new shapes for it. She breathed out. She looked into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was lower than she meant it to be. My wolf has not been this quiet in 3 years. It was the first thing she had let herself say out loud about it. He did not move. He did not look at her. He did not turn it into a moment. I am glad. Do not. All right. That was all. She lay down on her cloak with her back to the fire. She did not sleep right away. But she did sleep. Sometime in the deepest dark of that night, far to the south of where they camped, a man stood at the edge of a small encampment of his own. Theron Blackmore was not a large man. He had never needed to be. He was lean, carefully dressed even on the trail. He had been waiting for Izel Vex's signal since the day before. The signal had not come. He did not pace. He never paced. He stood with his hands behind his back and looked at the trees, and ran through what the absence of a signal could mean. Oppen 1. She had not had a safe moment. Oppen 2. The forest had not let the smoke rise high enough to read Doppent. 3. She had been caught. He weighed the 3. He did not weigh them long. He had built his whole career on assuming the worst of every silence and being right about it more often than wrong. He turned to the 4 wolves at his back. The 4 he had chosen because they were the 4 who would do anything he asked. We move. Tonight. We do not wait for confirmation. They are coming faster than we projected. We will be at the stone 3 days before the moon. He paused. And we will not be on the southern approach the king has been told to expect. We will be at the Elder Grove. Inside it, waiting. If they come the southern way, we still reach them first because we are closer. If they come the eastern, they come straight to us. One of the wolves spoke. Carefully. The grove will not let us in. Theron's mouth made a small thin shape that was not quite a smile. The grove has not been asked properly in a long time. Watch. He turned to the trees and began to walk south. The 4 wolves followed. In the deepest hour of that same night, Seraphina opened her eyes. She did not know what had woken her. The fire was low. The others were still. The forest was quiet in a way the forest was usually quiet, except she'd feel something at the edge of her hearing. Not sound exactly. Pressure. The way a storm makes itself felt before it makes itself heard. She sat up. Across the fire, the king's eyes were already open. They looked at each other. He spoke very low. What? I do not know yet. The trees are bracing for something. Direction. South. He closed his eyes for a beat. Open them. He is moving. Yes. Faster than the timeline allowed. Yes. Then so are we. She nodded. She woke the others without raising her voice. They moved in the quiet, practiced way of people who had been trained to be efficient in the dark. The fire was killed. The bedding was rolled. Cassian Thorne was on his feet before he had fully woken up. Alaric Wren rose with the slowness of his age, but with no wasted motion. Lyra was already organizing Azel, who looked gray but compliant. They were moving inside 15 minutes. The forest had changed in the night. Seraphina felt it in the soles of her feet. The trees were taut. The air had thinned. The moonbells, when she stepped on a cluster by accident, gave off a faint cold light instead of the warm one they had given off in the day. She knew this feeling. She had felt it twice in 3 years. Both times, she had backed away from whatever was ahead of her in the path. Both times, she had returned to her cottage and slept badly for a week. She did not turn back this time. She walked forward. The path she had been planning to take was the long way, the southern lip of the inner ring. Safe, predictable. 3 days to the stone. That route was now a trap. Blackmore was somewhere on it, or worse, somewhere off it. Already inside the inner ring, the only faster way was the cut. The arch she had never crossed. The double-rooted oak at the boundary of the elder grove. She had been on the threshold of that arch exactly once. 2 winters ago. She had stood under it, put her hand on the bark, felt the forest answer, and walked away. That answer had been, not yet. Today she did not have the option of not yet. She stopped the group 50 yards short of the arch. She turned. She looked at them. She did not raise her voice. The path I planned is no longer available. The man who is coming for us is closer than we thought, and he is on it. The only way to reach the stone before he reaches it is through the elder grove. I have never been inside it. I do not know if it will let us through. If it does not, it will turn us around. If it does, we will reach the stone tomorrow. Possibly tonight. She looked at the king. You should know what you are asking of these trees before I ask them. He did not blink. Ask them. She turned to the arch. She walked up to it slowly. She placed her bare hand on the bark of the left trunk. She placed her other hand on the right. She did not speak out loud. She had never spoken to the forest out loud. She closed her eyes. She thought, with everything in her, not for me, for all of them. Because what comes after the man behind us will be worse than anything you have ever endured. Please. The forest did not answer in any way she could point to. The wind that had been moving through the canopy went still. Every bird in earshot stopped at once. The silence held so long she thought she had failed. Then slowly the roots at the base of the arch moved. Not far. 2 inches. 3. They drew themselves aside, the way curtains are drawn aside. The narrow space between the trunks widened until it was wide enough for a man with broad shoulders to pass through without ducking. The elder grove had opened. She lowered her hands. She turned. She did not have words for what she felt. So she used the words she had. Single file. Behind me. Do not speak inside. Do not draw a weapon inside. If you have a thing in your chest you cannot bring through a sacred place, leave it on this side. She stepped under the arch. The others followed. The grove closed around them like underwater light, pale, blue, silver. The trees inside were older than any she had ever seen, older than any she had ever read about. Their bark looked, in places, more like skin than wood. The moonbells inside were enormous, the size of dinner plates. Their glow was steady and warm. The air tasted clean in a way that went beyond air, in a way that made her, briefly, ache in a place she had taught herself not to feel. Cassian Thorne breathed in once, sharp, like a man who had just remembered an old promise. Lyra Ashfield's hand went flat over her own chest for a moment, as if she were steadying something there. Ezel Vex was crying again, silently, as she walked. The tears moved without her doing anything to stop them. The king moved a step closer to Seraphina's shoulder than he had walked all day. He did not touch her. He just walked closer. She let him. They moved through the grove for the better part of an hour. The light did not change. The grove did not have a sense of time. Then, ahead of them, between 2 of the great trees, she saw the change in the canopy. The opening, a clearing, in the center of it, low to the ground, the size of a seated person, pale gray, almost white, ringed by a low circle of moonbells that pulsed faintly, the moonglass stone. She drew breath to say what it was. She did not need to. From the far side of the clearing, between 2 of the great trees on the opposite edge, a figure stepped forward. Lean. Carefully dressed, even on the trail. 4 wolves in shifted form stepped into formation behind him. Theron Blackmore smiled. At last, Theron Blackmore's smile did not reach his eyes. It never had. 3 years ago in the tribunal hall, the same expression had moved across his face when the council pronounced the verdict, and Serafina had understood, too late, that it was not a smile at all. It was a tool. A small instrument he used to make people relax half a second longer than was safe. She did not relax. She stood 5 paces from the moonglass stone, the king at her shoulder. 4 members of her group fanned behind her in the way they had practiced without practicing. Lyra at her right, Cassian at her left. Alaric just behind, hand near the satchel where he kept what he needed for wounds. Izel behind him, pale, quiet. Across the clearing, the 4 shifted wolves stood in a hard triangle behind Theron. Iron-gray fur, yellow eyes, hackles low and ready. Theron's voice carried across the clearing like a polished thing. One hand on a stone in a forest is not a legal confirmation, Eric. You know this. You have read the same records I have. Eric did not move. I have read more. Then you know an unwitnessed touch is no claim. I have witnesses, your own people, 5 of them, plus the woman the council exiled, whose exile is reversed by my royal seal under Kaelin Vale's confession, whose standing as Luna of record is restored. A pause. The voice level. Plus the forest itself, which has not allowed your scouts inside its borders for 6 months. The forest does not testify in a tribunal hall. It does not need to. You are not and was very still. Serafina watched Theron's face. She watched the thing she had not seen well enough 3 years ago. The thing she could see now, because 3 years in this forest had taught her how to read what people did with their hands when their mouths were busy. He flexed the small finger of his left hand twice. A tick. She had watched him do it across a council table once. Then, in the tribunal. Now here, it was the tick he made when his plan had begun to slip and he was waiting for his backup. She turned her eyes slightly, without moving her head. She looked at the 4 enforcers. The far one on the left was breathing too fast. The one at the back of the triangle had its weight on the wrong paw. These 4 had not been allowed into the grove on their own. They had come in behind Theron on the strength of whatever charm or threat he had used at the boundary. The grove had not approved of them. It had only tolerated them long enough to draw them in. The grove was waiting. She felt that the way you feel a held inhalation in a room full of strangers. Eric stepped forward. He did not walk toward Theron. He walked toward the stone. He stopped 3 paces from it. He turned. He looked at her. He held out his hand. She knew what he was doing. She had known when he had told her the night before in front of the fire that he had one answer and kept finding new shapes for it. She knew now that this was the shape it had been moving toward since the morning he had spoken her name at her door. But she had not understood, until this exact moment, why he had come for her himself. Theron's voice cracked across the clearing. "What are you doing?" Eric did not turn to him. He kept his eyes on her. There is a clause in the founding record of this stone. 300 years lost. I had to dig 2 months to find it. A king does not stand at the moonglass stone alone. A king stands with a Luna at his hand. That is the original confirmation. A pairing, not a solo claim. A king alone cannot be confirmed here. He can only be tested. Theron went very still, the same way a man goes still when he realizes he has been holding a key for a door that does not exist. Eric's voice carried, "You came here alone, Blackmore. You have no Luna. The stone will not confirm you. It would not have confirmed you, even if you had arrived first. You spent 6 months chasing a stone you could not use." Theron's smile slid sideways for 1 second. Only one. Serafina saw the man underneath, the man she had been wronged by for 2 careful years. The man who had stood in a tribunal hall and watched the council brand her wrist, and felt nothing but the satisfaction of an instrument that had performed correctly. The smile reassembled, words on old paper. "You think the council will accept your reading of a 300-year clause? The council does not have to accept anything. The stone does." Theron's eyes flicked to her. They had not really looked at her since the moment she had spoken his name in his tribunal voice 3 years ago. They looked at her now. For the first time in his life, she thought he was looking at her as if she were the obstacle. He had spent 2 years dismissing her as a piece on a board he was moving. He was learning in this clearing that she had not been a piece. She had been the other player. She walked to Eric. She took his hand. It was not a romantic motion. It was not even a personal one. It was the kind of motion two people make when they have agreed, without speaking, to lift the same weight at the same time. His fingers closed around hers. Steady. Calluses against calluses. A working grip. Together they turned to the stone. Together they placed their joined hands on its surface. The stone was cold. Cold the way deep water is cold. For one breath nothing happened. She felt the texture of the rock against her palm. She felt his hand inside hers. She felt the forest holding around them. Then, inside the stone, light began to gather. Not a flash, not a burst. A slow gathering of something that had been waiting under the surface. It rose up through the grain of the stone, the way warmth rises through cold glass. Pale, silver white, not blinding. Steady, the ring of moonbells around the stone caught the light and threw it back doubled. The clearing filled, Eric exhaled. Just once, the stone confirmed. Theron Blackmore shifted. There was no negotiation in it. No final speech. Just the explosive decision of a cornered animal. He went down to 4 legs in one violent motion. Fur rippling along his spine. Mouth opening wide on a long sound that was half rage and half terror. The 4 enforcers shifted with him. The triangle behind him became 4 blades coming forward. Eric did not shift first. He let go of her hand. He took 2 steps to put his body between her and the line of attack. Only then did he shift. She had been told, by men who had been at Raven Pass, what his wolf looked like. The men had undersold it. He came out black, not dark gray, not brown. Black the way a river runs at midnight, larger than any wolf she had ever seen. His shoulders in this form came to her chest. His eyes burned a full hot gold. The ground vibrated very slightly when he moved. Lyra was at her side instantly, hand on her arm. Back, with me. Now, she let Lyra pull her 2 paces back toward the trees. Cassian came with them. Alaric moved to position himself near the stone, the satchel open, the healer already calculating. Izel Vex did something Seraphina did not expect. She stepped forward. She did not shift. She did not draw a blade. She walked, on her 2 human legs, into the clearing, toward the enforcer at the far left. The one whose breathing had been wrong, Halen. The wolf's head turned. Halen. Stop. The wolf at the far left of the triangle, whose name was apparently Halen, was the one Izel had grown up with in the same northern pack. Before the brother. Before the bargain. Before the 4 months. He was a year older than her brother. He had played in the same stream when they were children. He had taken Theron's coin because Theron had told him his sister was being held to it. He had been lied to about it. She had not known he was here until she walked into the clearing. She knew. Now, Halen, look at me. He never sent her brother. He sent her hair. He never sent the brother. You took his coin to protect a sister he was never going to give back. Halen? The wolf's yellow eyes wavered. The wolf next to him snarled, snapped sideways at Halen, a hard discipline strike that was meant to put a brother back in line. Halen flinched, almost obeyed, then did not. He stepped out of the triangle. The other 3 closed ranks around the gap. But the formation had cracked, and a cracked formation in the Elder Grove was not a formation any longer. It was 4 wolves trying to remember their training without their 5th angle covered. Eric was already moving. He went for the one in the center of the triangle. The largest. The one closest to Theron. He hit it shoulder to shoulder, and they went down together in a tangle that broke against the soft moss with a sound she felt in her chest. The other 2 enforcers tried to flank. One slid on ground that gave under its paws in ways flat ground should not give. The other lost a half second of angle as a root, very slowly, rose 2 inches from the moss and put itself under its right front paw. The grove had decided. The fight, when she replayed it later, lasted less than 2 minutes. It was efficient and brutal and unromantic in the way real violence between wolves is unromantic. Eric did not waste motion. The enforcer he had taken down stayed down, bleeding from the throat, unconscious but breathing. The 2 others met him at the same time and lost. One yelped, broke, and ran for the trees. The other went down under his weight, belly up, paws turned aside in submission within 4 heartbeats. Halen had backed all the way out of the fight. He stood with his head low, ears back, watching the wolf that had snarled at him bleed on the moss. Theron tried to circle. Eric followed him with his eyes only. He did not chase. He stood between Theron and the stone, between Theron and her, and waited. Theron lunged. It was not a strategy. It was the lunge of a man whose plan had run out 20 seconds ago, and who was operating now on pure refusal to accept it. Eric received the lunge the way a wall receives weather. He turned with the strike. He used Theron's own weight against him. He had Theron on the ground in 3 motions. A paw on the back of his neck, a jaw at his shoulder. No bite, just the pressure of a jaw that could close and was not closing. Theron's wolf shuddered. Once it shifted back, bones cracking. The slow, shaming reverse of a strong wolf becoming a small man. He was on his knees on the moss when Eric lifted his paw away and stepped back. Eric shifted back too, took his cloak from where Lyra had carried it folded, set it around his shoulders, walked forward. He stopped in front of the Therson. He did not gloat. Stay on your knees. Theron stayed. The forest exhaled around them. Long. Theron looked up. He did not look at Eric. He looked at her. He had been looking for the moment all his life when he could make her give him something. Just once. Some scream, some tear, some loss of composure. 3 years ago he had taken her seat and her bond and her name, and he had not been able to take that. He thought, here, in the worst moment of his life, he might still pull one piece of her from her chest. She let her face go still. She walked forward to him. She stopped at a careful distance. She looked at him with what she had decided. 3 years ago in the dark, under an oak, she would look at every man with a title who tried to take something from her. Nothing. You will not get what you came here for, Theron. Not from me. Not today. Not ever. You thought 3 years in the forest would break me into something quieter you could pick up afterward. It made me quieter. That part you got right. You just never understood what quiet does in a woman who has nothing left to lose. Quiet is the one weapon you have never been able to fight, because you have never been able to be it. He looked down. Eric let him stay there for a beat. Then, you will return with us to Dusk Hollow Keep. You will face the full Alpha Council. The evidence is gathered. The witnesses are already at the stronghold. Your 2 allies on the council have rescinded their support effective dawn yesterday by sealed letter. I delivered the letters myself before I came north. A pause. You will face the tribunal without a strategy, because every strategy you had is already taken from you. You will do this voluntarily, on your 2 feet, because the alternative is that I use the authority this stone just confirmed it here in this clearing. Theron's mouth moved. Nothing came out. He stood. He looked once at the wolf on the ground that was still breathing. He looked at Halen, who would not look back at him. He walked toward the trees on the far side of the clearing. Lyra and 2 of his own remaining wolves, the one that had submitted and the one that had run and stopped at the boundary, fell in around him under guard. They left the way he had come, the clearing held. Seraphina turned to Eric. She did not say anything for a moment. He did not say anything either. He simply nodded once, slowly, the way a man nods when something inside him that has been carrying a weight for 12 years has finally set the weight down for a moment to breathe. She walked to the stone. She put her palm flat on it. She did not say thank you. She thought it. The stone was warm under her hand. They walked out of the elder grove the way she had brought them in. The arch at the boundary closed quietly behind the last of them. She did not look back at it. The forest had taught her long ago that the places that keep you do not need your goodbye to keep being themselves. Out at the perimeter of the forest, on the third day after they had entered it, Caspian Hale was waiting. He met them at the tree line with the bulk of the army in their disciplined silence behind him. He looked at the king. He looked at Theron in front under guard. He looked, for a long second, at Seraphina. She watched the old soldier's face. She saw it do a thing she would not be able to name for him, but which she recognized because she had felt the same thing in her own chest at 23, in the first season of her marriage to Kaelan Vale, when she had begun to understand that her husband was not what he had been advertised as. Caspian had spent his career doing as he was told. He had not stopped being grateful for the order of it, but somewhere in the last 48 hours, on the perimeter, holding a folded note Lyra had sent him, dispatching a team north to save a 15-year-old boy from a packet that would have come to his sister's door, something inside him had shifted onto a different rail. He saluted the king, then he turned to her. He did something she did not expect. He inclined his head, not the small acknowledgement a senior officer gives a civilian guide, the deeper bow a soldier gives a Luna when he is on duty in the field. He had not been ordered to do it. He had done it because he had decided to, my lady. She did not know what to do with her face. She did the only thing she could think to do. She inclined her head back, the same depth, soldier to soldier. Survivor to survivor. He straightened, the army moved out. 17 days later, at Dusk Hollow Keep. The tribunal opened. The keep sat in the old eastern range, a fortress of gray stone built into the cliff face above a long valley. She had never expected to see it again. She walked into the lower hall, with her hair down, her clothes plain, and her hands folded in front of her, in the way she had learned in 3 years of grinding herbs at a workbench. The way that said, "My hands have already done their work today." 4 of the 5 Alpha Council members were present. The 5th, one of Theron's former allies, was reported to be in his bed with a sudden illness. The court secretary read that into the record with a level voice that did not quite hide the dry irony in underneath. Seraphina sat as witness, and as the subject of the reversal. Both required different kinds of steadiness. She gave her testimony in the flat, unembellished voice of a woman presenting evidence, not asking, not pleading, stating. She named the year she had been Luna. She named the work she had done. She named the night the documents had been forged. She named the morning of the tribunal 3 years ago. She did not name what Kaelan had done. She did not have to. Kaelan had done that himself in writing. Theron stood in the dock. He did not deny the core. He could not. The forgeries had been authenticated by 3 independent record keepers. The witnesses he had paid had recanted under questioning. Kaelan's confession had been examined by every council member personally and confirmed as genuine. There was very little for Theron to say. He said it anyway. He stood in the dock and made a careful, reasonable, patient case for why his interpretation of events should be considered alongside the documents. His voice was the same voice it had been 3 years ago. Smooth, hypothetical, inviting agreement. This time, 4 alphas listened in silence. None of them nodded. None of them tilted their heads in the small, unconscious way a listener tilts his head when they are being persuaded. When he finished, the senior council member, an alpha of perhaps 65 years with hair the color of winter ash, simply said, Theron sat. The deliberation took an hour. The verdict took 3 minutes to read. Theron Blackmore was stripped of his alpha title, his pack lands, his ancestral claim, his seat on every council he had ever sat on. He was committed to 10 years of rehabilitative custody under the Eastern Pack Tribunal, beginning with an immediate transport at sunset. The senior council member set the gavel down. She had imagined this moment for 3 years. She had imagined the shape of her own face when she watched it. What she had not imagined was how little it would feel like winning. She watched Theron's stand. She watched the guards take him by both arms. She watched him not look at her on his way out of the hall. She watched the small, thin line of his shoulders, which she had once feared, which she had once not understood, which now looked just like the shoulders of any other man whose plan had run out. And she felt only tired, not satisfied, not vindicated, not light-tired. She understood, sitting in that hall, that she had been waiting for this moment to feel like a door opening. It did not feel like a door opening. It felt like a bone that had healed badly, being broken again and reset. Painful, necessary. Then slowly, in the days to come, better. Real justice did not feel like victory. It felt like a long correction. She filed that understanding away. She would carry it the rest of her life. The reversal ceremony was held 3 nights after the verdict. At the full of the moon, the main hall of Dusk Hollow had a ceiling that opened to the sky. A traditional design for exactly this kind of ceremony, though the council members had told her quietly that the opening had not been used for 40 years. She stood in the center of the stone floor under the open sky. 3 council members spoke the old words. She had tried, on the days before, to learn them. They had refused to stick. She decided that was probably right. These were not words she was meant to say. They were words being said for her, by others, in the long, slow grammar of an institution, learning to do what it had failed to do the first time. Eric stood 3 paces away, out of armor for the first time she had ever seen him. Dark clothing. No crown. The seal of the king's office in his hand. The senior council member finished the 3rd recitation. Eric stepped forward. He pressed the seal to the reversal decree. He set the seal down. He spoke the closing line in a voice that was meant for the moon in the hall, and her in that order. Be it known. From this hour forward, the exile of Seraphina Vale is dissolved. Her name is struck from every record of shame. It is restored to every record of honor. The silver ring on her wrist went cold, not painfully, not slowly, the way a coal goes cold, the moment water hits it. The metal lost its weight before it lost its shape. The shape lost itself before it lost its color. By the time she lifted her wrist to look at it, the brand was gone. The skin where it had been was smooth, a faint shade paler than the skin around it. A ghost. The kind of ghost only she would ever see, because only she had carried the mark long enough to know exactly where the absence was. She stood with her wrist held up under the full moon. Lyra Ashfield was crying, quietly, somewhere behind her left shoulder. She did not turn to look. She did not want to make Lyra hide it. She pressed the unmarked wrist to her chest. She breathed in. She breathed out. She thought, in the very small private place she had built 3 years ago and carried with her ever since. I am not what they made of me. I have not been. I am not now. It was not triumphant. It was simply true. She lowered her wrist. She walked off the floor. The hall applauded. She did not bow. The thing they were clapping for was their own institution finally catching up to who she had been all along. She left the hall by the side door. She found the small walled garden behind the keep on the 3rd night after the ceremony. She had not expected him to come for her yet. She had hoped he would. She had also feared he would. Both things at once. He gave her 3 days without asking, without pressing, without sending a message. On the 3rd night, she sat on a stone bench under the full aftermath of the moon, her bare wrist resting on her knee, feeling the cold spring air on skin that had been covered for 3 years, and she heard him at the garden gate. She did not turn. He sat at the other end of the bench, half a man's length between them. A careful, courteous distance. She let the quiet sit a moment, then, "You can come closer." He moved. His shoulder ended near hers. Not touching, near. She looked at the moon. "On the 2nd night in the forest, you told me about your grandmother. I have thought about it every day since, so have I." She turned to look at him. "Why did you come yourself? Not a courier, not a general. You did not need to ride into that clearing in person. No. Then why? Because the alternative was to send you a letter. A letter that explained that your exile had been overturned, and that you were now welcome at certain ceremonies if you cared to attend. I read that letter 3 times in draft and tore it up 3 times. It was correct. It would have done the job. A pause. It felt like doing the right thing in the wrong way, and the right way was to ride out to your door and ask for your help. With my own face. So you could decide what to do with it. She looked at him for a long moment. You also wanted to see me? Yes. You wanted to see if my wolf was still in there? Yes. You wanted to know if I had been broken in the way you could not save your grandmother from being broken. He held her eyes. Yes, she breathed out. She did not look away, Eric. I am not your grandmother, I know. I am not a debt you can pay. I know that too. Then what am I? He did not answer at once. He looked at her with the same steady attention he had brought to the moonbell mushrooms, to her crude little chairs, to her clay cups, to her wrist on the day he had ridden into her clearing. He answered her with the same patience he had answered every difficult thing she had put to him in 3 weeks of knowing him. You are the first person I have stood next to in 10 years and not felt the weight of the throne between us. She let that sit. She turned her hand over on her knee. The unmarked wrist, the pale ghost shape only she could see. She reached across the small distance between them. He saw her hand. He took it. His fingers closed around hers the way they had on the ice bridge, the way they had on the stone, not claiming, closing, the grip of a man who knew the difference between holding and owning. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She said the truer thing. Ask me again, when everything has settled. When I am not still being surprised by my own life, turning the right side up? All right. I am not going anywhere, I know. They sat there a while longer under the moon, her hand in his, her wrist on her knee, pale skin where the ring used to be. Neither of them spoke again. When the cold finally drove them indoors, she walked to the side of the keep where the council had given her a room. He walked to the king's chambers on the opposite wing. They did not look back at each other at the corner. Neither of them needed to. 3 months later, at the spring full moon, in the great hall of Ravencrest Keep. With every alpha and council member who could be fit into the space, and many who could not standing in the courtyard below open windows, she stood before the moon again. She had chosen everything herself, the hour, the hall, the simple dark dress the color of forest shadow, the fact that her hair was down, the fact that she had no protocol keeper standing behind her telling her where to put her hands. She had spent the last 3 months at the cottage on the eastern edge of the Thornvale as much as at the keep, learning to live in both, riding the long road between them, taking the time she had asked for, and being given it without question. Eric stood across from her, out of armor. No crown. The old silver scar on his jaw caught the candlelight at the angle she had memorized at the summer times of 3 months. He held a length of braided silver cord. The moon-blessed officiant of the council spoke the words. Do you come to this bond freely? It was the easiest sentence she had ever said. I do. The cord was tied. Once around her unmarked wrist, once around his battle-scared one. The moon was full and present and very bright in the open ceiling of the hall. The wolf inside her, the one she had spent 3 years teaching to be silent, the one she had taught herself she might have lost, lifted its head. It did not whine. It did not press at any cellar door. It simply rose, fully, as if rising were the most ordinary thing in the world. She shifted. It was not painful. It was the opposite of painful. It was the feeling of a window thrown open after a long winter. Light moving into a room she had been sure was sealed forever. The room was warm. She had not been gone from it. She had only been waiting outside it long enough to be sure she could trust it again. Her wolf came out pale silver, almost white, the color of the moon, the color the veil line had carried for 3 generations. and that no one in this hall had seen on a Vale wolf in nearly 20 years. She shook out her fur. She felt the strength in her own legs. She lifted her head. Eric shifted next to her. The same black wolf the clearing had seen. The same gold eyes. He was taller than her at the shoulder by a clear margin, but the shape of his attention had changed. The gold eyes were not the eyes of a wolf in a fight. They were the eyes of a wolf at a homecoming. He stood very still. He simply waited and looked. She crossed the small distance between them. She pressed her shoulder against his side. The hall, on its feet, made the kind of sound she had not heard since she was 19 years old. At a different ceremony in a different hall, in a different time of her life. Outside, in the courtyard below the open windows, the army began to howl. It started with one wolf, then 5, then 30, then all of them. The sound rolled out over Ravencrest Keep. It crossed the inner walls. It crossed the outer walls. It rolled down the long valley and across the territory borders and into the night, where it carried, over hours, to every settlement and every pack and every small village that had for 3 years said her name in past tense, including Ravenshollow. In Ravenshollow that night, an old farmer named Owen Marsh, who had once nodded along with the story about the blood moon and the cold and the wolves, stood at his door with a tin cup of coffee and listened to the long sound rolling in from the east. He did not know whose howl it was. He knew, the way old men know things, that something had been corrected somewhere. He stood at his door a long time. He thought about a young woman he had seen once at a midsummer fair when his daughter was little. He thought about how she had walked into the fair without looking around for permission. He thought about how when the village had decided she was dead, he had not asked anyone how they knew. He had just nodded along. He set the tin cup down on the rail of his porch. He spoke once to no one, to his own younger self standing in some other doorway some other year. I should have asked. I should have asked at the time. He went back inside. He sat by his fire a long time before he slept. Listen, you have just spent a long hour with a woman who was buried alive by a village that thought it knew her story. She was not the strongest wolf in her pack. She was not the loudest voice in her tribunal. She did not have an army. She did not have a title that survived the years she was 19. When the people closest to her chose silence, at the one moment her life depended on a single word, she walked out of the gates of her old life with rabbit blood on her apron and 3 hours to clear the border. And she lived. That is the whole story, not that she won. Not that she got even. Not that she rose. She lived. Most men of a certain age know what that costs. There is a kind of strength a man does not understand until he has lived long enough to have been silent at the wrong moment, and lived long enough to know it. There is a kind of courage that has no audience. There is a kind of loyalty that you finally have to admit, somewhere past 60, was given in good faith to the wrong men, and the only thing you can do with that knowledge is put it on the right side from this day forward. Caelan Vale did not raise a hand against his wife. He did not strike her. He did not slander her in public. He simply did not speak at the moment. A single sentence from him would have changed everything. That kind of silence is not neutral. It is a choice. The longer you live, the clearer that choice becomes. For 3 years, no one watched Seraphina lay rabbit traps in the snow. No one watched her grind valerian by lamplight. No one watched her copy old herbal lore by hand into the margins of books she had carried out of exile. No one called her brave. She did not call herself brave. She simply did the next small thing, in the dark, with no audience. That is the only kind of courage that finally counts. The kind no one is watching. The world claps for the loud kind. The other kind is the kind that holds up a life. Caspian Hale learned the hardest lesson of all in the dark hour at his perimeter fire. The lesson that some of the loyalty you gave, in good faith, for years, went to the wrong men. That you did not ask the right questions when you were 22. That you nodded along when you should have looked up. This is not failure. This is becoming a grown man. The grown man is the one who can finally turn around at 40, or at 60, or at 70, and say out loud to no one, I should have asked. I should have asked at the time. And then he does the one small thing he still can do. He dispatches the team north. He bows to the woman his old institution wronged. He does not pretend the past did not happen. He simply does the next right thing in front of him. It is never too late to put your loyalty on the right side. And in the council hall the day Theron was sentenced, Serafina learned the lesson she had been waiting the 3 years to feel. The verdict did not arrive the way she had pictured it. There was no music in it, no light, no release, only the quiet weight of a thing finally placed in its correct column. Real justice is not a parade. It is a ledger balanced. A name moved from one side of a page to the other. You do not get the years back. You do not get the silence back. You get the correction. That is enough. That has to be enough. The grown man knows it is. So here is the question to sit with tonight. How many people, in the towns and the streets and the kitchens of your own life, were buried alive in past tense, by stories that were never their truth? How many neighbors? How many in-laws? How many of the quiet ones at the post office, or the gas station, or the back pew of the church on Sunday morning? How many were spoken about with the same easy satisfaction the village of Ravens Hollow used for Serafina Vale? And how many times, in your own long life on this earth, did you stay quiet at the one moment a single word from you could have stopped a thing? Both of those are honest questions. They deserve honest answers. Not in the comic sense, in the place inside you that already knows them. If you have ever been the one buried under a story you did not get to tell, share that tonight in the comments below. Just a sentence. Just an honest sentence. Someone watching tonight needs to read it. If you have ever been the one who stayed quiet, and you have spent the years since wishing you had not, that one is harder to write down. But you can write it. You are old enough now to write it. The moon heard Serafina Vale's howl tonight. It will hear yours, too.